The cover-up and the dark forest. The quietest place in the universe. Picture this. Right now, this very second, humanity is listening. Not with ears, with machines. Radio telescopes sweep the sky like slow, patient lighthouse beams. Arrays stretch across desert. Dishes point upward from mountaintops and valleys. We're scanning billions of stars. Not dozens. Not thousands, billions. And around many of those stars we now know are planets. Rocky ones. Wet ones. Ones sitting in that oddly specific zone where water doesn't boil away or freeze solid. In other words, places that look suspiciously like home. So the expectation is obvious. If life is common, if intelligence emerges eventually, if technology tends to leak signals the way ours does, then space should be loud, buzzing, chatty, messy, a cosmic party we're late to. But that's not what we find. What we find is nothing, silence, not the empty kind. Not the there's nothing here kind, the uncomfortable kind. My line, the universe isn't empty, it's quiet, and that's much stranger. This is the paradox that keeps scientists awake at night. With the math we have, the number of stars, the age of the universe, the speed at which life appeared on Earth, there should be civilizations everywhere, older than us, smarter than us, long past the phase of burning fossil fuels and accidentally announcing their presence to the cosmos, and yet, no calls. No beacons, no obvious signals. No cosmic hello. It's as if we walked into a vast city at night, lights on in the buildings, infrastructure humming, but no voices. I know what you're thinking. Maybe we're just early. That's possible. But here's where the story starts to feel off. The universe is very old. So old that if intelligent life were even slightly common, we shouldn't be first. We shouldn't even be close. We should be tripping over relics, passing abandoned highways of energy, catching accidental broadcasts. Instead we get static. Which leads to a quieter, more unsettling question. What if the silence isn't accidental? What if the universe isn't empty but careful? Imagine walking into a forest at night. At first you hear everything. Insects, birds, movement in the underbrush. Then something changes. Everything goes quiet. No warning, no explanation, just stillness. Every animal freezes. Not because the forest is empty, but because something is listening. That idea has a name, we'll get to it soon. But before we do, let's sit with the feeling. Because this silence doesn't feel like ignorance. It feels like restraint. Like a place where making noise has consequences. And suddenly, all the questions we've been asking start to tilt. Not, why haven't they visited us? But, why would anyone announce themselves at all? And that question changes how you interpret everything. The ancient gaps. The sudden knowledge, the withdrawal, the observers who stopped interfering. What if silence isn't absence, but strategy? If the universe is full of life, why does it act like a library at closing time? That's the question this chapter opens with. And once you hear it, it doesn't let you go. Because maybe the scariest possibility isn't that we're alone. It's that we're not, and everyone else already learned the same lesson. Don't speak, don't shine too brightly, and whatever you do, don't draw attention to yourself. If everyone should be here, why isn't anyone talking? Let's explain this the simplest way possible. Imagine a really big playground, not a normal playground. A playground so big it takes light years to walk across. On this playground, there are billions of swings, billions of slides, billions of sandpits. And we know kids like to play. They don't need special conditions. They don't need perfect timing. Give them space, a little time, and something to climb, and eventually, someone shows up. That's the universe. Big universe, many stars, many planets, and now we know something important. Planets like Earth aren't rare. They're common. Some are older than Earth by billions of years. Some had a head start so large it's hard to imagine. So if life forms easily and intelligence eventually emerges, and technology tends to broadcast itself, then the universe shouldn't be quiet. It should be busy. If life were rare, silence would make sense. But life should be common. That's the problem. This contradiction has a name. The Fermi Paradox. It comes from a simple lunch table question physicist Enrico Fermi asked decades ago. Where's everybody? Not angrily. Not dramatically. Casually, as if the absence itself was the strange part. Because when you run the numbers, the age of the universe, the number of stars, the probability of Earth-like worlds, Even conservative estimates suggest there should be thousands, if not millions, of advanced civilizations in our galaxy alone. Not hiding, not subtle, obvious, and yet we hear nothing. No confirmed signals. No undeniable artifacts. No galactic billboards announcing, "We were here first." That silence is the paradox. And here's where things get interesting. Silence isn't neutral. In everyday life, silence can mean no one's home, someone's asleep, or someone doesn't want to be heard. If you knock on a door in a city and no one answers, you assume absence. If you knock on a door in a dangerous neighborhood and no one answers, you pause. You listen. You wonder why. Put me aside. Sometimes the scariest answer isn't "nothing's there." It's everyone learned to stop talking. This is where the Fermi Paradox stops being a math problem and starts becoming a behavioral one. Because intelligence doesn't just invent tools. It invents strategy, and strategy responds to risk. So instead of asking, "Why haven't we heard anything?" some scientists began asking, "What would make silence the smart move?" That shift matters. Because suddenly, silence isn't a failure of detection. It's a choice. And choices imply experience, learning, mistakes. Maybe civilizations don't vanish because intelligence is rare. Maybe they vanish or hide because being visible is dangerous. Think about our own history. When isolated cultures met technologically advanced ones, the result wasn't mutual celebration. It was conquest, collapse, erasure. The quieter group didn't survive. The loud one didn't either, just longer. So if that pattern scales, if intelligence eventually realizes that announcing yourself paints a target, then the universe wouldn't sound like a crowded room. It would sound like a forest holding its breath. Which makes our situation suddenly feel very different. Because for the last century, humanity has been doing the opposite of hiding. We've been shouting, radio signals, radar pings, television broadcasts, nuclear signatures. We've been lighting fires in the dark and wondering why no one waves back. The Fermi Paradox doesn't say we're alone. It says something else. That being early might be dangerous. That being loud might be naive. And that silence, far from being empty, might be the oldest survival strategy in the cosmos. Which brings us to the next, darker step. Because if silence is intentional, if advanced civilizations learn to hide, then the question isn't where are they? It's what are they hiding from? And once you ask that, the universe stops feeling lonely. It starts feeling watched. Maybe space is just hard. Now, let's stop and let the most comforting explanation speak. Because it deserves a fair hearing. Maybe space really is just hard. Distances are enormous. Travel takes energy we can barely imagine. Civilizations might burn out before they ever leave their home star. That all makes sense. I agree. Partially. Now you might be thinking, okay, but space is dangerous. True, but danger usually leaves wreckage. Even failed civilizations leave marks, ruins, debris, accidental signals. Think about us. We haven't mastered interstellar travel and already we've filled space with noise. Radio leakage, radar echoes, satellite constellations, nuclear signatures that shout someone's home. We didn't mean to broadcast, we just did. So here's the uncomfortable follow-up. If other civilizations existed, especially older ones, why don't we see even mistakes? Why no ancient probes drifting between stars? Why no abandoned megastructures? Why no cosmic junk drawer of failed experiments? Total silence is a strange outcome because complexity almost always leaks. Every system has exhaust. Every technology leaves fingerprints. Yet when we look out into the universe, it's not just quiet, it's clean, which shifts the question. Not, why haven't we found them? But, why haven't they been careless? Carelessness is the default state of intelligence. Learning restraint takes time. It takes consequences. It takes a moment when someone realizes, being seen has a cost. That realization doesn't come from equations. It comes from experience. And here's the thing that quietly ties this back to everything we've already explored. We've seen this pattern before. Early help, early expansion, then withdrawal. Not because the helpers disappeared, but because interference changed. Sumer's teachers stopped teaching. The builders stopped building. The watchers stopped appearing, not with drama, with silence. If the universe works the same way, if intelligence matures toward caution rather than conquest, then maybe the silence isn't the result of difficulty, it's the result of learning. Learning that the loud don't last. That visibility invites attention. That attention isn't always friendly, which makes our current moment feel awkward. Because humanity is still young enough to think shouting is brave. We send messages. We announce ourselves. We debate what to say as if the act itself is harmless. But maybe that's the tell. Not that we're alone, but that we haven't learned yet what everyone else already has. And that possibility reframes everything. Because the absence of evidence doesn't feel like emptiness anymore. It feels like discipline. Like a galaxy full of civilizations that learned, quietly and independently, the same hard lesson. Don't be obvious. Don't be first. And whatever you do, don't assume the silence means you're safe. Once you see it that way, the question stops being about discovery. It becomes about timing and whether we're early or simply late to understanding why the forest went dark in the first place. When hiding is the only survival strategy, now we step into the part of the story that feels colder, not dramatic, not explosive, just honest in a way that makes you lower your voice without realizing it. Imagine the universe as a forest at night. No moon, no streetlights. Just shadows, branches, and distance. Every civilization is a hunter. Not because it wants to kill, but because it wants to survive. In this forest, every movement matters. Every sound carries. Every light reveals position. My explanation: in a dark forest, the smartest move isn't to shout hello. It's to stay silent and listen. This idea is called the dark forest theory. And it begins with 3 very simple assumptions. Not sinister ones, practical ones. The 3 quiet rules. First, resources are finite. No matter how advanced a civilization becomes, it exists in a universe with limits. Energy, matter, space, even abundance has boundaries. Which means survival isn't just about growth. It's about competition, even if that competition is only potential. Second, intentions are unknowable. You cannot know what another civilization wants. Not truly. They might be peaceful. They might be desperate. They might see you as irrelevant, or useful, or dangerous. And there's no reliable way to tell. Signals can lie. Words can mislead. Technology can deceive. Which leads to the 3rd rule, the one that changes everything. Third, first contact is irreversible. Once you reveal yourself, you can't take it back. You can't unring the bell. You can't hide again. Your position is known. Your existence is confirmed. And if the other party decides you're a threat, it doesn't matter whether you meant to be. Ask the quiet question. Would you answer a signal if you didn't know who sent it? Would you light a fire in the forest just because you felt lonely? This is the logic that turns the universe silent. Not because civilizations are cruel, but because caution beats optimism over long timelines. Why silence wins? In a dark forest, shouting is suicide. The safest civilizations aren't the strongest. They're the quietest. They don't build megastructures that shine like beacons. They don't broadcast their location. They don't leave obvious traces. They observe. They calculate. They wait. And if they ever act, they act decisively, not loudly, efficiently. This isn't paranoia. It's game theory stretched across cosmic time. Given enough civilizations, someone will eventually be hostile. Given enough time, one mistake is enough. So everyone learns the same lesson. Don't be the one who speaks first. Now, look back. This is where everything we've already seen rearranges itself. The early chapters suddenly feel different. What if early visitors were open? Hands-on, direct, unhidden. Teachers, builders, engineers. What if contact wasn't originally taboo? And then, something happened. Not here. Somewhere else. A lesson learned the hard way. A civilization that revealed itself and paid the price. Because after that moment, behavior changes. Contact becomes limited, then symbolic, then observational, then silent. What if contact didn't stop because we failed, but because the universe taught a harsher lesson? Think about the pattern again. Sumer's teachers didn't stay. The builders withdrew. The watchers stepped back. And now? Nothing. No new monuments. No new machines. No public contact. Just observation. That doesn't look like abandonment. It looks like policy. The most uncomfortable turn, here's the part that's hardest to sit with. If the dark forest theory is even partially true, then announcing yourself isn't brave. It's reckless. And humanity, for the last century, has been doing exactly that. We've been broadcasting our presence without consensus, without understanding the risks, without knowing who might be listening. We act as if the universe owes us friendliness. But the universe doesn't owe anything. It doesn't reward innocence. It rewards restraint. And suddenly, the ancient silence doesn't feel eerie anymore. It feels wise. Civilizations that last don't advertise. They endure. They learn when to speak and when not to. Which leaves us with a quiet realization. Maybe the reason we don't see them now isn't because they're gone. It's because they're doing exactly what survival demands. Watching, waiting, and hoping the new voice in the forest learns when to stop talking before someone else decides to answer for them. Silence isn't always a lie. Now let's turn the telescope around, away from the stars, back toward ourselves. Because whenever this topic comes up, the same question always follows. So, is there a cover-up? That word, cover-up, immediately brings to mind secret rooms, whispered oaths, shadowy figures sliding folders across tables. But real life is usually less cinematic and more unsettling. Yes, governments keep secrets. That's not controversial. In recent years, we've seen declassified reports, official acknowledgments of unknown aerial phenomena, admissions that objects have been tracked, recorded, and not identified. Notice what's missing. No conclusions, no explanations, no clear story, just uncertainty. Governments don't hide truth because it's shocking. They hide it because it's destabilizing. Think about it. A shocking truth fades. People adjust. But a destabilizing truth? That rearranges foundations. And here's the key shift most people miss. This doesn't require a single grand conspiracy. No secret world government. No unanimous silence. Just institutional caution. Layered hesitation. Imagine you're in charge of stability. Your job isn't curiosity, it's continuity. Now imagine discovering, even suspecting, that humanity is not alone and worse. That we might be observed. What do? You can't prove it definitively. You can't explain intent. You can't predict consequences, so you stall, you downplay, you reframe. You say unidentified instead of unknown, not to deceive, but to buy time. Because the real question isn't, is it true? It's, what happens if people believe it is? What happens to religion when we're no longer the center of creation? What happens to economics when scarcity feels artificial in a watched universe? What happens to power when governments aren't the highest authority in the room? Those aren't scientific problems. They're civilizational ones, and civilizations don't like sudden identity crises. So the silence persists. Not because everyone knows the same secret, but because no one knows how to responsibly tell a story that could collapse meaning faster than it creates understanding. This creates a different kind of cover-up, not a lie. A pause. A collective decision to wait until language, culture, and psychology catch up. And here's the uncomfortable part. That hesitation mirrors the behavior we've been seeing everywhere else. The ancient visitors withdrew. The watchers went quiet. The universe stopped answering, and now? We're doing the same thing, listening carefully, speaking cautiously, avoiding declarations we can't take back. Because once a species realizes it might not be alone and that being noticed has consequences, silence stops looking like ignorance. It starts looking like adaptation. Which leaves us sitting with one last unsettling question before this chapter closes. If the universe learned to be quiet for survival, and humanity is slowly learning the same lesson, then maybe the cover-up isn't about hiding aliens. Maybe it's about giving us time to become the kind of species that can live with the truth, without breaking itself apart the moment it hears it. The loudest silence of all. There's one possibility quieter than invasion, quieter than extinction, quieter even than hiding. What if they never left? Not in ships hovering over cities, not in bases under mountains, just at a distance. Observers don't intervene. Experiments don't announce themselves. Teachers step back once the lesson begins. My reflection, if we were an experiment, the worst thing to do would be to interfere once it got interesting. Think about how learning actually works. You don't stand over someone forever. You don't correct every mistake. At some point, you watch what they do when you're not in the room. That's the test. And suddenly, the long silence looks different. Not absence, not abandonment, deliberate restraint. This idea connects quietly back to what we heard in the Theobuba message. Growth over control, responsibility over rescue. Non-intervention once a species can choose for itself. If that framing is even partly true, then the universe isn't ignoring us. It's waiting to see how we handle power without supervision. waiting to see whether intelligence matures into wisdom or collapses under its own momentum. This kind of observation wouldn't need ships in the sky. It wouldn't need monuments or messages. It would need only one thing: distance. Far enough to avoid influence, close enough to watch outcomes. And here's the part that quietly reframes everything we've been worried about. If observers never left, then there's no deadline, no countdown, no invasion clock, just evaluation. Which is somehow more unsettling, because it means nothing dramatic is coming to stop us. No correction, no intervention, just consequences. Ask the question gently: what if silence isn't abandonment, but supervision? What if the universe isn't empty because no one cares, but because someone cares enough not to interfere? That possibility doesn't make us small, it makes us accountable. And it leaves us with a realization that sits heavier than fear. If we are being watched, not as prey, not as pets, but as a developing intelligence, then the most important signal we send isn't a radio broadcast. It's how we treat our planet, our neighbors, our power. Because if this is the moment when the training wheels came off, then what happens next won't be decided in the stars. It will be decided right here, by a species finally learning that being alone and being observed can feel exactly the same, when the lesson is about who you become, when no one stops you from choosing. Why the forest went dark? Let's make this small. Small enough to fit in a child's hands. Imagine a playground. Kids everywhere, running, shouting, climbing. Then one kid screams. Not a playful scream, a real one. Someone got hurt. Suddenly everything changes. The playground doesn't empty. The kids don't disappear. They just get quiet. They watch. They learn where not to run. They lower their voices. Not because they're gone, because they're careful. Maybe the universe isn't empty. Maybe it's disciplined. That's what the silence starts to feel like when you stop treating it as absence. A learned behavior. A collective decision made long ago by intelligences that discovered something the hard way. Being noticed has consequences. And once you understand that, you don't rush to speak again. You wait. You observe. You decide very carefully what kind of presence you want to be before you announce yourself. Now bring that back to us. If we're being watched, if others chose silence, if the training wheels are off, then we're approaching a moment that no ancient monument, no lost machine, no genetic hint could answer for us. A moment of choice. Because one day, soon or far away, we won't just be listening anymore. We'll be deciding. Deciding whether to broadcast, whether to intervene, whether to reveal ourselves to something younger, quieter, unready. We'll be the ones standing at the edge of the forest. And the question won't be, is anyone out there? It will be, are we wise enough to speak? Whether the silence of the cosmos is fear, wisdom, or strategy, it leaves us with a sobering realization: the universe may not be waiting to greet us. It may be waiting to see what kind of presence we choose to become.